Good morning. I'm Congressman Joe Crowley, the chair of the Democratic Caucus, and I've been joined by the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Linda Sanchez. Firstly, let me express our disappointment on the actions taken by this speaker to thwart what we believe is really the will of the majority of the House of Representatives in killing the effort to have the Hurd-Aguilar bill be discharged and sent to the floor for an up or down vote. It's sad that the American people won't see the real Queen of the Hill, really the chance for the House to vote on a very bipartisan bill. The Speaker and the House Republican leadership have thwarted the efforts of both Democrats and Republicans, and we want to thank those Republicans who stood up and signed on to the motion to discharge. We were two Republicans shy of getting that bill to the floor, but it will not thwart our efforts from speaking out. It will not stop us for standing up for the dreamers in this country who are trying to really contribute so mightily to the advancement of our economy and of our nation. It's sad that it appears as though the only two bills that will come to the floor are the Goodlatte bill and whatever the bill that the Speaker is putting together as a compromise with the Republican majority. But it's sad that this bipartisan bill, the Hurd-Aguilar bill, apparently will not be placed on the floor, will not be given an up or down vote. What we do know is if this bill were to go to the floor, it would have overwhelming support on both sides of the aisle. We would see that this bill would actually pass and be sent on to the Senate for action. I also just want to speak briefly about what is happening on our nation's border as we speak. Individuals who are coming and fleeing from countries where they are facing violence, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be gang violence, political violence, drug violence, who are seeking refuge, who are seeking asylum here in the United States, who are actually seeking out border agents and asking for asylum. They're not trying to sneak into the United States. They're being detained. They're being sent to federal prisons. Their children are being ripped from them and separated. Babies as young as 18 months are being taken from their mother's arms, screaming. They can hear the cries of their children in a cell within earshot of where their children are. If that is not psychological torture, I don't know what is. And the mark that that is leaving on those children and on their lives is something that can't be fixed. This practice needs to end. It is cruel, it's inhumane, and it's a form of torture. All in the effort to deter individuals who are coming to this country for no other purpose but to save their lives, to save the lives of their children. It's the real Sophie's choice. And what our country has stood for decades is that if you face oppression, if you face violence, if you face the threat of death or violence, and you come to the United States, we will give you the refuge that you deserve. And our Attorney General this week announced that domestic violence and gang violence will no longer be qualifiers for asylum. People who face domestic violence, sometimes death, gang violence, sometimes death and rape, that those no longer will be qualifying determinants as to whether or not one receives refuge in the United States and asylum. It is not reflective of who we are as a people. And to add that with the family separation, it's an abomination what's taking place. It is going to be an indelible mark on the soul of our nation. We haven't seen something like this for a very, very long time in our country, and something that will scar these children for life and these families for life, but maybe more importantly, will scar America and something that we may never be able to let down. With that, let me turn now to my colleague from California, Ms. Linda Sanchez.
Thank you, Joe. I too share Joe's regret that the Republican majority couldn't see fit to work with Democrats and to allow an up or down vote on bipartisan DACA legislation that would provide a permanent solution for talented young adults who wait in limbo. And I feel like a broken record because I've been saying this since September of last year, but I'm going to say it again. The Republican leadership is the sole impediment to a solution for Dreamers. They've stood in the way from day one. And so we shouldn't be surprised that they couldn't find their way out of the box that they have put themselves in. I would have guessed that maybe Speaker Ryan's announced retirement at the end of this term might have made him stand up and do the right thing, but that isn't the case. Republicans need to wake up and realize that they're putting politics ahead of the lives of talented young men and women whose only dream is really the American dream. The announced votes that we will have on DACA fixes are both Republican bills drafted without Democratic input. They are not bipartisan in any way, shape, or form. And all we've asked for all along is, hey, you guys have immigration bills? Great. Let's put all the immigration bills up for a vote and see which one gets the most votes. And let that be the law of the land. But they are afraid to do that because they know, as Joe said, that either a Clean Dream Act or the Hurd-Aguilar bill, both of which are bipartisan, would probably win. And they don't want that because fundamentally, at the base of it all, no matter how much lip service they give to wanting to provide a permanent solution for Dreamers and DACA recipients, the fundamental truth is, no, they really don't. So we will continue to reach out and try to work with them on a compromise, but we just need some brave souls on the Republican side of the aisle to do the right thing. Yeah, to buck party leadership, but to stand up for this country and what's good for this country. As if that weren't difficult enough to take, Donald Trump and his Republican allies in Congress continue to sabotage the ACA. They couldn't come up with an alternative. They tried to repeal and replace it. When they couldn't do that, they started to sabotage the ACA. The ACA, which provided millions more Americans with affordable health care coverage, not a perfect bill, but a good start. Well, now they are, through their actions, they are driving up premiums and they're jeopardizing that quality, affordable health care for millions of Americans. And the Trump administration just last week continued to attack that bill that so many Americans rely on. They're going after one of the most widely used provisions and one of the most popular, I might add, provisions in the Affordable Care Act, the protection for more than 130 million people who are living with pre-existing conditions. And whether that's a pre-existing condition like asthma or cancer or Alzheimer's, you name it, 130 million Americans rely on that provision to be able to afford health care. And now they're attacking that. Most people like what the Affordable Care Act does. Again, not a perfect bill, but a good start. And Democrats have been anxious to try to go back, now that the law has been in place for several years, go back and fine-tune that legislation or to fix provisions that didn't work out the way that we had hoped. But Republicans have never been willing to work with us on improving the ACA. They've completely stuck to the repeal of ACA, and when they couldn't get repeal, now it's sabotage ACA. Going after people with pre-existing conditions so that they lose their health care coverage, not the symbol of a great nation. And I will end with that, and we'll open it up for questions.
Let me also say that I'll be speaking later today at Freedom Park at 1:30, along with Luis Gutierrez, Pramila Jayapal, and several of members of Congress. speaking out against the policy of family separation at our borders as well. And I just lastly just say on that point again, we have not seen a single Republican stand up against this policy. The Republicans talk often about family values. They pride themselves on being supposedly the party of family values. What family value is there in ripping a child from their mother's arms? I asked that question. What? Yes.
On that note, the compromise bill that's being proposed, it's apparently supposed to address this issue so that families aren't separated at the border. It's going to clarify the settlement. Do you think that's going to attract any Democratic support?
Look, I think that this is not something that is a legal issue. The Trump administration is not doing this because they're legally bound to doing it. They're doing it because they choose to do it. That's the difference here. There is nothing legally right now compelling them to separate families at the border. They are doing this, and they have been outspokenly saying they're doing it to deter people from coming to the border. And they further have taken action to disqualify application for asylum by saying that if you're coming to flee domestic violence or gang violence, that you're no longer eligible for asylum. So these are all steps that are not legal issues in terms of the law. It is willful on the part of this administration to take steps that we've never done before. What's disappointing about what's happened here is that the Republican leadership is not allowing for real debate on the DREAM Act. They're trying to find political answers so they can pat themselves on the back and at the end know that this administration will continue this policy until some Republicans stand up on the floor of the House or outside the White House and say no to this president and no to this policy and against Jeff Sessions and what he's doing to human beings. That's what Republicans need to do. They need to speak out against this administration for this abomination and condemn them for this family separation that is taking place at our nation's border.
Can I?
Yeah.
I also just want to add to that. Supposedly, and we haven't seen the language from their bill, because not surprisingly, we typically don't see the bill until the day before it's voted on. But Republicans live a true hypocrisy. They stand for family values, and yet they allow children to be torn from their parents at the border. In this compromise bill, they are eliminating family reunification as a category of immigration. So while they say that they may be fixing this, no separation at the border, the longer term issue is that they will be separating families because they are doing away with family reunification in their bill.
Yes.
Canadian reporter, direct your attention to the other border and ask your thoughts on war with Canada, trade or otherwise?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily otherwise. Clearly, the president's engaged in a trade war with our allies, and I think it's perplexing to everyone, especially the American people, why this behavior towards our allies, and why the cozying up to dictators, why the cozying up to Duterte in the Philippines, to Kim in North Korea, to Putin in Russia. And the same week that he went after our allies in Europe at the G7, he also said it was time for Russia to rejoin the G7 or G8. Here is a country that invaded Crimea and was the reason for their expulsion from it. And we know that they attempted to undermine our democracy, and they're rewarded by reentry, and at the same time attacking our allies. It is really the undermining of the post-World War II era that was created as a consequence of the war. And seeing all this happen before our eyes is incredibly unsettling.
I'll just add, because this is an issue that I work a lot on, that with the president's unilateral decision to impose tariffs on our allies, and he talks about being taken advantage of, in terms of trade. Well, let's go after the cheaters. I mean, because we know who the cheaters are. It's China. China doesn't live by the trade rules that we negotiated. And yet the president has done this blanket tariff on Canada and Mexico, our European allies. And all that does is it invites retaliatory tariffs from those countries as well. And the ultimate losers in this game are American workers and workers in other countries as well. We are all reliant on trade. There is not a country in the world that doesn't rely on trade. And so we need to be open to working with our allies instead of making these unilateral decisions that sour our relationships and that put us in economic jeopardy. And that's exactly what our president is doing.
You talked about the Republican leadership, kind of sidelining this discharge petition here, but isn't your beef truly with, according to Carlos Corbello, those 5 to 7 members who were considering signing the discharge petition and ultimately didn't? I mean, the Republican leadership cannot compel their members to sign the discharge petition. They were on the fence about it, and since those 5 to 7 did not sign, isn't that really where your beef is?
Our beef is with the Republican leadership in deterring and stopping those individuals. Yes, I'm disappointed that those individuals didn't have the backbone to stand up against their leadership and allow for a bipartisan bill that has the support of overwhelming support of Democrats, obviously, and a healthy support from the Republican Party to put that bill to 218 sponsors to get it to the floor. But this is all done and thwarted by the leadership, by Paul Ryan on the phone, calling his members, begging them not to sign on to this, and coming up with some kind of compromise, which we haven't seen, we haven't played a part of, and been involved in. So that's where the disappointment, once again, is. And overall, the overall Republican response to the Dreamers is that they'll put bills on the floor that probably won't go anywhere either in the Senate. And that's what's really more disappointing.
Yeah. Can I add?
Yeah,
to that?
go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the Republican leadership is amazing in its hypocrisy. They have been undermining the discharge petition to be certain, and there are members that they've managed to convince to stay off of that. But the fact of the matter is there is still a majority support for DREAM Act or Herd Aguilar in this Congress. And if the Speaker of the House were truly a Speaker of the House that cared more about the country and the House than his caucus and the 40 most conservative members, he would have put the DREAM Act or the Herd Aguilar bill on the floor a long time ago. He alone has the power to schedule what votes will come, what pieces of legislation will come to the floor for votes, and he has been the sole impediment. So the blame lies squarely there. Are we disappointed that there weren't a handful of Republican members that couldn't just dig deep and find the intestinal fortitude, as we say in Spanish, los cojones, to stand up to their leadership? Yeah, I'm disappointed, but I'm more disappointed that the Speaker puts his party above this country.
Yes.
For some of those moderates that you talked to who were initially supporting the discharge petition, I spoke to one today who said, well, this was an effort to get our leadership to the table, and they might get some concessions on guest workers and some other issues. How do you, going into November and the elections, how do you, address that and get the message to the voters that you want to bring them, that is, that some of these Republicans were not doing what you believe they should have done to protect Dreamers?
That's their response, that they were simply using the motion to discharge to get concessions from their leadership. That's the response as well, if that's their response, I mean, it's a cop-out. While hundreds of thousands of lives are on the balance here. And to take that as a position and to disregard the aspirations and the dreams of these young people who are cultural Americans for some political gain, to me, is more than wrong. It's terribly discouraging, I think, to the American people to see how how the Republican Congress cannot act and get things done. They simply cannot get anything done of substance beyond the tax bill in this party. here in the House. And it's disappointing to the American people.
I will just say, even the tax bill, there were concessions supposedly that members assented to vote for the tax bill because they were given assurances that they would get votes on other things, and those never came to fruition. They got played. So if these, Republican members think that they're getting concessions from their leadership, they're probably getting played, because I have my doubts that they'll actually get what they believe they negotiated for. And on that score, we've always said all along, DACA, I mean, we could have debates about immigration and a comprehensive bill, and trust me, we're ready. We're anxious to have those debates. We've always said that Dreamers is the one area that's simple where we can agree. Let's make that the bill and get that done and off the plate so we don't have to negotiate that anymore. And then let's talk about guest worker and everything else. The fact that they're trying to muddy the water just makes it less likely that we'll get a dream DACA fix, because now they want to pull in all these other issues where there's just lack of consensus. Let's get the easy consensus stuff done first and get it off the table, and let's work on the really hard stuff. So I don't know that the strategy that these folks are employing is really a smart strategy. I think they're going to get played.
Just on opioids this week, Republicans are saying that all of these bills are pretty bipartisan. Should we expect any bills to have any Democratic opposition, or do you think they'll all pass pretty easily?
I think it remains to be seen what actually comes to the floor and what the process is, if it's open for amendment or not, if it's closed rules. We'll see what actually comes to the floor. I think there is bipartisan support for the issue of the opioid crisis we're facing in the country, in America. And it's I think, our hope that we can work in a bipartisan way on an issue that's critical to our country right now. But that remains to be seen this week and next week. We'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you all.